The message that tore through the galaxy wasn't just a call for help, it was a harbinger of doom. A desperate plea, sent from a dying world, reached out into the vastness of space. It wasn't a cry of fear, it was a signal, an invitation, a trap. On the edge of a quiet, unremarkable system, a signal appeared out of nowhere. No one knew where it had come from, nor why it had been sent. The message itself was vague, but the desperation in the tone was unmistakable. "Help us. Please," it begged, with a strange urgency, as though its sender knew exactly what was about to unfold. But what no one realized was that the SOS was no simple distress signal. It was a carefully calculated call, a carefully timed whisper into the void. And when it reached its intended destination, the galaxy would never be the same. The fleet that answered wasn't a fleet anyone had expected. It wasn't a military force, nor a humanitarian aid group. No, it was something far more terrifying. The kind of force so ruthless, so relentless, that entire civilizations had fallen before it, never even realizing they were under threat until it was too late. When it came, it didn't ask questions. It just conquered. The planet that sent out the SOS was called Coriath, a once thriving world that had seen its fair share of war and political strife. But Coriath was different now. It was dying, a result of years of neglect, corrupt leadership, and resource depletion. Yet, it was a world that had once been home to pioneers, dreamers, and warriors. Now, it was little more than a husk, with only a handful of survivors clinging to life in the remnants of their shattered cities. For those who remained on Coriath, survival was no longer a matter of day-to-day struggles with hunger or disease. It had become a matter of facing the inevitable. The planet's natural resources were exhausted, and a hostile fleet was on its way to claim the remaining scraps. They were days away from total annihilation, and everyone knew it. But what they didn't know was that their call for help wasn't meant for just anyone. It was directed toward one specific fleet, a fleet known across the universe for its unmatched power and speed. A fleet that had decimated entire star systems without leaving a trace. Theirs was not a fleet of rescue ships, or soldiers sent for peacekeeping, it was a fleet of destruction. And Coriath's desperate SOS? It had been planned all along. As the message reached its destination, the silence of space was shattered by the arrival of the fleet. Massive ships with dark, jagged edges emerged from hyperspace, their black hulls reflecting the light of distant stars. They moved in silence, so precise and orderly that it was almost as if they knew exactly what needed to be done. The entire fleet, thousands strong, descended toward the doomed planet with an unmistakable purpose. Yet, among the survivors on Coriath, there was no immediate realization of what was happening. They watched in stunned silence, unable to comprehend the scale of the invasion. They had expected a small force, perhaps an envoy, or maybe a diplomatic team sent to negotiate for resources. What they received, however, was a nightmare. But then, just as quickly as the fleet appeared, their arrival took on a strange new meaning. The survivors who had sent the SOS began to understand, this wasn't a rescue. This was their plan all along. They hadn't just asked for help. They had invited the storm. The twist was something no one saw coming. Those who had sent the SOS weren't victims, they were the instigators. They had known exactly what they were doing. They had lured this unstoppable force to Coriath, and now, the entire galaxy would pay the price for their actions. As the dark ships continued their descent, the survivors' hopes were dashed. Their world, already on the brink of collapse, was now being overtaken by a force so powerful, so unstoppable, that even the bravest among them realized there was no escape. They were about to be caught in the wake of something far bigger than themselves. But why? Why would the people of Coriath invite such destruction? What could be worth risking everything for a fleet that was known for nothing but obliteration? The truth, however, was far more complicated, and far more terrifying. The survivors were about to learn that the story of the SOS wasn't just about a call for help. It was the beginning of a saga that would test the very limits of humanity's survival instincts and unravel the deepest secrets of the universe itself. And that, dear audience, is where the real story begins. The eerie silence of space hung over Koreath, broken only by the distant hum of the incoming fleet. Each massive ship in the dark armada moved with an undeniable precision, cutting through the void as if they were not just vessels, but a single, living organism. The ships did not communicate with the people below, they didn't need to. The survivors had already learned the most painful lesson of all: this was not a rescue mission. In the rubble of Koreath's largest city, a group of survivors gathered in a forgotten bunker. Among them was an elderly man named Corwin, once a proud commander of Koreath's defense forces. His graying hair and deep lines told the story of decades spent at war, but it was his eyes that revealed the deep sadness in his heart. He had known, deep down, that the fleet would come, but not like this. Not in the wake of an act of betrayal. Beside him stood Miri, a young woman whose defiance was only surpassed by her desperation. She had been part of the team that transmitted the SOS, but as the ships drew nearer, the truth started to weigh heavily on her. The real question lingered in her mind: had they just doomed their planet for nothing? "We did what we had to," Miri whispered, trying to convince herself more than Corwin. "The fleet will save us. They'll get rid of the invaders, the ones who are coming for us." Corwin shook his head slowly, his eyes fixed on the view screen showing the approaching ships. "You don't understand, Miri. This is no rescue. The fleet doesn't do saving. It conquers, destroys, and leaves nothing behind." Miri turned to him, her eyes wide with confusion. "What do you mean? What happened to the world you knew? The Koreath I was raised in?" Her voice cracked, a mixture of fear and disbelief. "We're desperate. Our resources are gone. The invaders, they're coming for us, this was our only hope." "But it wasn't just the invaders we needed to worry about," Corwin replied, his voice low and grim. "We're the ones who invited this destruction. This fleet, they don't rescue. They erase. We've doomed ourselves." Miri's eyes searched his face, trying to make sense of his words. She had always known Koreath to be a world filled with pain and struggle. Her people had fought to survive for decades, using every last scrap of their dwindling resources just to hold on. But this was beyond anything she had ever imagined. This wasn't just an invasion, it was a reckoning. "Why did they answer?" Miri asked, barely able to comprehend the magnitude of what was happening. "Why did they come?" "Because we called them," Corwin said, his voice heavy with regret. "And because they knew exactly what they were walking into." The truth began to settle in like a weight on Miri's chest. The fleet wasn't responding to an innocent cry for help, it was answering a call that had been strategically placed, one that would bring about the destruction of their world in the name of something far darker than simple survival. Back on the surface, panic was beginning to set in as more survivors scrambled to find shelter. With no way to stop the fleet and no resources left to survive a planetary invasion, the people of Koreath were left with only one grim reality: they would not escape the impending doom. But as the fleet's ships continued their descent, Miri and Corwin began to piece together the full scope of the betrayal. The SOS was not just a cry for help, it had been a plan. The survivors had, knowingly or unknowingly, invited the fleet to erase them, to wipe Koreath clean, and to take control of the very heart of their existence. The question was not just about survival anymore, it was about what was to come after. There were no allies left. No external forces to turn to. The fleet's reputation had made it a terrifying force to be reckoned with. Its history was one of destruction, not diplomacy. And yet, as Miri stood there in the dark, watching the approaching ships, a strange feeling washed over her. Despite everything, the fear, the loss, the overwhelming weight of their mistakes, she felt a glimmer of something else. Could there still be hope for her people? Could they still find a way to make peace with their inevitable end? A voice echoed over the comms, one that made Miri freeze in place. It was an unexpected message, one that hadn't come from the fleet, but rather from one of their own, the survivors who had been working behind the scenes for years. The message was short, but it held a terrible weight. We did this. But it is not too late. There is a way to survive, if only we're willing to sacrifice everything. The transmission ended abruptly. Miri's heart raced as she looked at Corwin, who had gone pale at the words. He knew what this meant. Everything, Miri repeated, the gravity of it sinking in. What is the sacrifice? As they prepared for the unknown, Corwin and Miri couldn't help but question the true motives of the fleet. Were they truly the unstoppable force they had been made out to be? Or was there a darker reason behind their existence, one tied to the very survival of Coriatha's people? The darkness had only just begun to reveal itself. The true question was no longer about the fleet. It was about the survivors' own actions, the decisions that had led them to this very moment. And, as they would soon find out, it was a question that would not have an easy answer. The echo of the chilling message lingered in the air, a haunting reminder that their fate had been sealed by the very hands that sought salvation. As Miri and Corwin stared at each other, the weight of the transmission pressed down on them. Everything, Miri repeated, her voice trembling. What kind of sacrifice are we talking about? Corwin's eyes were distant, clouded with both dread and the years of war that had scarred him. He had fought in countless battles, but this was different. This wasn't a battle against invaders or conquerors, it was a battle against their own choices. A battle against time. There's no telling, he said, his voice thick with regret. But the price might not be what we expect. Miri clenched her fists, her eyes fixed on the blackening sky outside. The fleet's ships were almost here. The enormity of their mistake seemed beyond repair, but somewhere deep inside her, a flicker of hope still clung to life. There had to be a way to make it right. We can't just wait for them to destroy us, she said, determination now hardening her voice. There has to be something we can do. Corwin exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. The only thing we can do now is follow the message. Find out what the survivors meant by sacrifice. If we're lucky, we might still have a chance to prevent the destruction of Coriath. But if we fail... The unspoken truth hung between them, if they failed, Coriath would be erased from the galaxy. And it wasn't just the planet they would lose. It was everything that made their people unique, everything they had fought to preserve for so long. A soft chime from the comms unit broke the silence. Miri stepped forward, her heart racing as she activated the transmission. A familiar face appeared on the screen, a fellow survivor who had been part of the team that sent the SOS. I hope you're both still alive, the voice said, tinged with exhaustion. We don't have much time. The fleet is closing in. Miri's breath caught. You said there was a way to survive. What do you mean by sacrifice? The survivor, a middle-aged man named Kalen, leaned in close to the screen, his face grave. I can't tell you everything, Miri. But I can tell you this, we're not just facing an alien fleet. We're facing the consequences of our own actions. The SOS we sent wasn't just a distress signal. It was a signal that called to something darker. Something older. And now, we must pay the price for what we've done. Corwin's brows furrowed. What do you mean by something older? Kalen hesitated, as if he were weighing his words carefully. The fleet, they're not just conquerors. They're a force of nature. A force that was awakened by our desperation. The truth is, we're not just facing a hostile alien empire. We're facing the wrath of something much more ancient. Something that once ruled this galaxy. And the fleet, the unstoppable fleet we've summoned, are just the heralds of its return. Miri and Corwin exchanged a look, the weight of Kalen's words sinking in. The SOS had not just been a call for help, it had been a signal that awoke something far more terrifying than they could have ever imagined. "You're saying we've brought about the return of an ancient force?" Miri asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and fear. "How do we stop it? How do we undo what we've done?" Kalen's expression softened, but the sadness in his eyes was palpable. "You can't undo it. But you can still make a choice. The only way to stop the fleet is to sacrifice something that binds us all together. Something that will take everything you've ever known, and everything you've ever loved. That's the price of redemption." The message ended abruptly, and Miri and Corwin were left in stunned silence. The implications of what Kalen had revealed were too much to process all at once. Not only had they summoned the unstoppable fleet, but they had also awakened an ancient force that now sought to reclaim the galaxy. The fleet's arrival was only the beginning. The true threat was far worse. "We're not just fighting for survival," Corwin said softly, almost to himself. "We're fighting for the future of the galaxy itself. We're standing at the edge of a precipice, and the choice is ours." Miri turned away, her mind racing. What had they done? What could they do now? The fleet was almost here, and with it came the ancient force that could spell the end of everything. She had to act fast. She had to find a way to make things right before it was too late. But how could they fight an ancient force? How could they stand up to something that had been dormant for so long? And what would they have to sacrifice to stop it? As she stared out at the darkening sky, the question gnawed at her: was it too late for Coriath? Was it too late for humanity? But there was no time for doubts. There was no time for hesitation. Back on the surface, the first waves of the fleet began to enter Coriath's atmosphere. The sound of heavy engines reverberated through the air as the ships deployed their forces, preparing for whatever came next. But for Miri and Corwin, the true battle was just beginning. They would need to find the sacrifice Kalen had spoken of, and they would need to do it quickly. As they gathered a group of survivors to search for answers, Miri could feel the weight of the choice pressing on her. The fate of Coriath rested on her shoulders now. The fate of humanity. The fate of everything they had ever known. But she was determined. She couldn't give up. Not now. Not when there was a chance, however slim, to save her world. The stakes were now higher than ever. Miri and Corwin knew that every minute they wasted could be the difference between life and death for Coriath. As they scrambled to find a solution to the growing threat, the city was abuzz with the imminent arrival of the fleet, an unstoppable force of destruction. The sense of panic had swept over the planet like wildfire, but Miri remained focused. Her mind churned with thoughts of Kalen's words: the fleet wasn't just an invading force. It was the herald of something far more sinister. Something ancient. "What do you think he meant?" Corwin asked, his voice tight with anxiety. They stood on the balcony of a high-rise building, overlooking the sprawling city below. The air was thick with tension as sirens blared, warning citizens to take shelter. Something older. What could he have been talking about? Miri's gaze was locked on the darkening skies, the first signs of the fleet's ships appearing on the horizon like distant stars growing steadily closer. The heavy dread settled over her like a blanket. "I don't know. But I have a feeling we're about to find out." Corwin turned away from the balcony and began pacing, his hand running over the back of his neck. "And the sacrifice he mentioned. What could that possibly mean? We've already given everything. What more is there to sacrifice?" "I don't know," Miri said, her voice shaking with frustration. "But if Kalen was right, if we really did awaken something older than us, then it's not just the fleet we're dealing with anymore. It's something worse." Corwin stopped pacing and faced her. His eyes, once full of determination, were now clouded with fear. "We're not ready for this. We never were." But Miri's gaze sharpened. She knew he was right, they hadn't been prepared for the coming storm. But they couldn't afford to lose hope. No. We are ready, she said, her voice steadier now. We just need to figure out what we're truly up against. We need to understand what Kalen meant about the sacrifice. And we need to find a way to stop the fleet from destroying everything we've worked for. With the ship's engines rumbling louder by the second, Miri knew the clock was ticking. But she also knew one thing: they weren't going down without a fight. The following hours passed in a blur of frantic planning and last-minute preparations. Miri and Corwin worked tirelessly, contacting anyone they could, trying to make sense of Kalen's cryptic warning. Alongside them were a group of survivors, many of whom had fought in the same wars that had led to the creation of the SOS, people who understood the stakes, who understood what it meant to risk everything for a chance at survival. But despite their best efforts, the situation seemed hopeless. No one had ever heard of the force Kalen spoke of. No one could explain what they were truly up against. Then, as the sun began to set, a breakthrough came. A team of engineers uncovered an ancient artifact buried deep beneath Coriatha's surface. It was an old relic, one that had long been thought to be a mere myth. The artifact pulsed with an eerie light, a sign that it was far older than anything Coriatha's technology had ever produced. Is this it? Miri asked, stepping closer to the artifact. Its surface was etched with strange symbols, symbols that seemed to shimmer and shift as though alive. Corwin studied it carefully, his brow furrowed. This could be what Kalen was talking about. An ancient technology. A weapon of some kind? Miri's eyes widened as the realization hit. A weapon, or a key? She glanced over at Corwin. This could be the way to stop the fleet. As they carefully examined the artifact, they discovered that it was not merely a weapon, it was a tool, a key that could unlock a hidden power within the planet. A power that could alter the course of the war and perhaps even stop the fleet in its tracks. The relic, it seemed, was linked to the same force that had once ruled the galaxy. Its very presence on Coriath had been the catalyst for the fleet's awakening. And now, it seemed, they had a choice. Use the artifact to save Coriath, but at a cost. Corwin turned to Miri, his voice barely above a whisper. If we use this, it could give us the power to fight back. But the sacrifice. What will it cost us? Miri looked down at the artifact, her mind racing. If the key was indeed tied to the ancient force, using it might come at a heavy price, one they could not afford to ignore. But what were their other options? Could they let the fleet destroy everything they had worked for? Could they risk letting the ancient force return to full power? She closed her eyes for a moment, summoning the strength to make the decision. The fate of Coriath rested in her hands. She opened her eyes, meeting Corwin's gaze. We use it. The moment Miri made her decision, the ground beneath them began to rumble. The artifact's power was activating. In a surge of bright light, the symbols on its surface flared to life. The ancient force that had long lain dormant stirred once more, its power beginning to awaken. But with the artifact's power came something else. A strange sensation washed over Miri, an overwhelming feeling that this was the moment that would define their future. The moment that would change everything. You sure about this? Corwin asked, his voice thick with unease. Miri nodded. We don't have a choice. Suddenly, the ship's engines outside roared louder, signaling that the fleet was closer than ever. Miri and Corwin had only moments to act. They rushed to the command center, their hearts pounding as they prepared to activate the artifact. The air around them crackled with energy, and the relic's glow intensified. Get ready, Miri said, her voice calm but filled with determination. As they set the artifact into its designated place, a brilliant beam of energy shot upward into the sky, targeting the fleet's ships above. The power of the ancient force surged through Coriath, crackling through the very air itself. The fleet's ships began to shudder, their systems malfunctioning as the artifact's energy interfered with their technology. But at what cost? The answer was already clear: the price of power was steep. As the energy continued to flood the skies, Miri could feel her connection to the artifact weakening. The sacrifice Kalen had spoken of was upon them. They had made their choice. Now, the outcome of that choice was still unknown. The beam of energy surged into the sky, blinding in its intensity. The artifact pulsed with an otherworldly hum, its glow bathing the entire city in an eerie light. Miri's hands trembled as she held the control panel, guiding the power of the artifact toward the ships above. It was a gamble, a dangerous, unpredictable move that could either save Coriath or bring about its destruction. "Can you feel it?" Corwin's voice was low, strained. "The energy, it's growing." Miri nodded, her jaw clenched. "It's too much, but we don't have a choice now. We have to push through." She tightened her grip on the panel, focusing all her energy on maintaining the flow of power. The artifact's influence had already begun to disrupt the fleet's systems. Ships trembled in the air, their sleek forms shaking as though they were being pulled by some invisible force. The engines sputtered, and communications between the ships faltered, but it wasn't enough. The fleet was still descending toward Coriath, and the true battle was yet to come. "Focus, Miri," Corwin urged, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and fear. "Whatever you're doing, it's working. But it's like the artifact's drawing everything in." Miri could feel the artifact's power coursing through her veins. It wasn't just technological, it was something far deeper, something that touched the very essence of the universe. Her heart raced as the light intensified, but something inside her began to waver. The energy was beginning to take its toll. "Corwin," Miri said, her voice shaky. "Something's wrong. I don't think I can hold it much longer." Before Corwin could respond, a voice cut through the chaos, a booming presence that seemed to reverberate in her bones. "You have awakened the force, but you cannot control it, child." Miri's eyes snapped open wide, her heart skipping a beat. The voice was not from any person, but from the very artifact itself. She could feel it, an ancient intelligence, a being older than the stars themselves. It had been dormant for centuries, and now, it had fully awakened. "What is this?" she whispered, breathless. "You have made the sacrifice," the voice continued, its tone cold and resonating with power. "But power without balance brings destruction. You have chosen your path, but now you must face the consequences." Miri's chest tightened. She hadn't expected this, she hadn't understood the depth of the artifact's power. And now, it was clear that this was more than a simple weapon. It was alive, conscious, and it held the balance of life and death within its grasp. Corwin stepped closer to her, his face pale. "What's happening to you?" "You're losing control, Miri." Miri tried to steady herself, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion. The artifact's grip on her was tightening, pulling her into its orbit. She could feel her energy draining, her mind fading as the power threatened to consume her. Don't let it take me," Miri gasped, clutching the panel in a last-ditch effort to regain control. "I have to finish this. For Coriath." But the artifact's voice only grew louder, its words more insistent. "The price of power is not just the destruction of your enemies. It is the destruction of yourself. You cannot control what you have awakened, and the balance you seek will come at a cost." Suddenly, everything went dark. Miri's senses returned slowly, her body heavy, as though she were submerged in a deep pool. The hum of the artifact had stopped, but the silence left a deep, oppressive weight in the air. She could no longer feel the connection to the power, it was gone. In its place was a deep, aching emptiness. "Miri? Miri, are you okay?" Corwin's voice broke through the haze, and Miri struggled to focus on his face, blurry at first, then slowly sharpening. "What happened?" she croaked, her throat dry. You passed out," Corwin said, his expression full of concern. We lost contact with the fleet for a moment. It looks like the artifact worked, but... He paused, his gaze shifting to the screen in front of them, which displayed the fleet's ships now hovering above Coriath, their movements slow and erratic. Miri pushed herself up, her head spinning. The feeling of disconnect, the sense of losing something she couldn't name, lingered. The power had stopped, but at what cost? Had they really won? Or was this only the beginning of something worse? What's happening with the fleet? Miri asked, still weak but trying to grasp the situation. The ships are disabled, but they're not falling. They're frozen in place. It's like they're trapped in time itself. Corwin's voice faltered. I don't know if it's the artifact's power or something else, but I don't think they're going anywhere. Or maybe they're just waiting, Miri muttered, her mind racing. Waiting for something. As she tried to stand, the full weight of the situation crashed down on her. The artifact had done something, something that had disrupted the fleet. But it hadn't destroyed it. And the feeling of imbalance in her chest had not gone away. She could hear the artifact's voice again in her mind, its cryptic warning echoing, the price of power, the balance will be broken. Meanwhile, outside the control center, a low rumble began to reverberate through the ground. It was subtle at first, but it grew louder, intensifying with every passing moment. The city was still holding its breath, waiting to see if the enemy would strike again. But Miri knew something had changed. She had awakened something more than just a weapon, it was a force. A force that had been dormant for too long, and now, it had been disturbed. Corwin, the artifact, Miri said urgently. We need to find out what we really unleashed. If the fleet is stuck in some sort of stasis, it might be waiting for something to trigger it. We can't assume this is over yet. As Miri and Corwin exchanged grim looks, the rumble outside intensified, shaking the building. The answer was clear, the worst was still to come. The ground beneath the control center trembled again, more violently this time, sending a ripple of unease through the room. Miri's hand instinctively gripped the edge of the desk, her heart racing. She exchanged a glance with Corwin, both of them silent, as the weight of the situation settled around them. I don't like this, Corwin muttered, his eyes darting nervously to the displays. It's like something's building up. The fleet, it's frozen, but it's not helpless. It's just waiting. Miri stood up slowly, her legs still unsteady, the after-effects of her connection to the artifact lingering in her body like a distant hum. She felt drained, a shadow of herself, as if the energy she had borrowed had stolen something vital in return. But there was no time for weakness now. The city, their people, Coriath, were still in danger. Wait, she said suddenly, her brow furrowing. The artifact, it's not just blocking the fleet's systems. It's doing something else. It's holding them here, but why? The answer didn't come easily. They had only scratched the surface of what the artifact was capable of, and its true purpose was still hidden beneath layers of mystery. Miri had no doubt now that they had not just found a weapon. They had unleashed something far more complex. The fleet had come to destroy, but now they were stuck, suspended in an unknown state. Corwin tapped away at the console in front of him, his fingers flying across the holographic interface. I've been trying to get a read on the ships, but it's like the data is scrambled. I can't get a clear signal. They're still locked in some sort of stasis, but I can't make sense of it. Miri stepped closer, looking over his shoulder at the blinking lights and chaotic readouts. Her mind raced. She had been part of the group that had found the artifact, and she was the one who had triggered its power. But she hadn't fully understood what she was dealing with. Now, every instinct told her that this power was more than just an object of destruction. It was a key to something far greater than the fate of Coriath. This is not just about the fleet, Miri said quietly, almost to herself. It's about the balance. The artifact, it's testing us. Her words hung in the air, and Corwin turned to her, confusion written across his face. Testing us? What do you mean? Miri's mind flashed back to the cryptic words of the artifact, its voice ringing in her mind, power without balance brings destruction. She felt the weight of that warning settle deep in her chest. The artifact knew we'd do this, she continued, speaking more to herself than to Corwin. It knew we would use its power, and it set up this trap. The fleet's not stuck just because of us. It's waiting for us to make the next move. And what move is that? Corwin asked, his voice tinged with worry. Miri didn't answer immediately. Her mind was racing as she tried to piece together the fragments of information she had gathered. The artifact wasn't just a weapon, it was a force of nature. It had been dormant for centuries, sealed away for a reason. It wasn't meant to be used, and now that they had awakened it, there was no telling what the consequences would be. The power of the artifact wasn't just contained within its physical form, it was part of the fabric of the universe itself. What if we're part of the test? She asked finally, her voice trembling with the weight of the realization. What if this isn't about saving Coriath or stopping the fleet? What if the artifact is measuring us, our choices? Corwin's face paled. You mean, it's not just a weapon, it's some kind of judge? Exactly, Miri said, her eyes narrowing as she tried to comprehend the enormity of what they were facing. The artifact is older than any of us. It's tied to something bigger than Coriath, bigger than this conflict. If we're going to survive, we need to figure out how to balance its power, not just fight with it. The rumble of the ground subsided, leaving an eerie quiet in its wake. The fleet above them remained frozen in place, suspended in midair, like silent sentinels watching over Coriath. But Miri knew it wouldn't last. Sooner or later, the artifact's power would demand a decision. And the wrong choice could cost them everything. How do we fix this? Corwin asked, his voice small, almost defeated. Miri took a deep breath, her mind focused and sharp despite the exhaustion that still gripped her. We need to learn more about the artifact. We need to understand what it's truly capable of. And we need to find a way to release the fleet, without triggering whatever it is that the artifact is waiting for. But even as she spoke, Miri knew the stakes had changed. The power that had once seemed like a gift was now a weight they might not be able to bear. Outside, the sky above Coriath was darkening. The fleet remained in place, motionless, but that did not mean they were safe. In the distance, strange, distant lights flickered across the horizon, signs of a new danger, perhaps. Miri's thoughts turned to the people of Coriath. They were counting on her, but the more she learned about the artifact, the more she realized she might not be the one in control. The artifact had already demonstrated its vast power, its control over the fleet's movements. But it was also an unknown, something with a mind and will of its own. And as Miri glanced up at the massive ships above, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. She had a sinking suspicion that the artifact's true purpose wasn't just to destroy. It was a judge, a witness, and a catalyst for a greater change, a change that would affect not only Coriath but the entire universe. I need to go back to the artifact, Miri said suddenly, her voice firm. I need to understand it. If I'm right, we're not dealing with a weapon anymore. We're dealing with a force that could change everything. Corwin nodded, his expression resolute. We'll go together. But Miri, whatever happens, we need to be ready. This could be far worse than we think. Miri's gaze hardened as she turned to face the control panel once more. Whatever it takes. We can't let this power consume us.